Hey everyone, welcome back to another Papo review. Today we're taking a look at their new 2020 Parasaurolophus. Now this figure is a straight up repaint of the original Parasaurolophus that we got way back in 2005, but unlike the original one which sported a very drab green and brown paint scheme, this one is much more vibrant looking. I ended up picking this figure up from Everything Dinosaur. It retails for just around $13. I'll leave a link in the description to Everything Dinosaur if you'd like to pick this figure up for yourself. Getting back to this figure, I actually don't own the original Parasaurolophus. Every time I saw that figure in stores, it just never really appealed to me. For one, I didn't really like the paint scheme, just that green and brown just really wasn't appealing to me. But the biggest reason why I never picked up the original Parasaurolophus, if you look inside the mouth, it actually has teeth where the beak is, which is completely wrong, and that always bugged the living crap out of me. Every time I picked it up, I just saw those teeth in the mouth just staring back at me. It just drove me absolutely nuts, and that was the biggest reason why I never picked it up. Even though this figure is a straight up repaint, it still has the teeth in its beak, but because of this new vibrant color scheme, I kind of overlooked that part, and yes, the teeth are still in there, but the way this figure is painted, they're not as noticeable as they were on the original figure. So let's just do a couple quick measurements before we take a closer look at this figure. This figure is just about 7.5 inches long from the tip of the tail to the tip of that toothy beak, and it is just about 4 inches tall to the top of that crest. So in real life, Parasaurolophus was about 31 feet long, so with those measurements, that put this figure somewhere in that 150 scale range. Moving on to the pose of this figure, it's sculpted in a nice bipedal stance, and the tail and head are just tilted slightly to the right. Papo always does a good job of making their figures feel alive, and it's hard to believe that this figure is from 2005. It shows you right off the bat when Papo started making dinosaurs, they could do bipedal poses. I know a lot of their earlier figures were tripods, and for some reason this year they seem to be going a little bit backwards, bringing tripods back, but this is proof right here that Papo can do nice bipedal figures that balance nicely. Moving on to the color scheme. The color scheme is really where this figure shines. The head is done in a nice red color, and you have some nice orange dry brushing along the crest and back for those red areas. Let me just get my light on here. The mid portion with the hind legs and tail are a very light brown color with a little bit of white mixed in. You have this really nice black banding all over the figure, and then when you get to the midsection right here, it's almost like a bluish gray color. So all these colors really work and make this figure pop. Like I said, this looks so much better than the original Parasaurolophus. Alright, let's zoom in and take a look at some of the finer details on this figure, starting with the head. The head is beautifully sculpted, a lot of nice scale detail. The eye is painted in yellow with a black pupil, and there's actually a gloss coat around the eye to give it that alive look. The beak is nicely sculpted, some nice fine details in there. It's painted yellow with some brown wash over to bring out all those little ridges. You can see the nostrils sculpted in right here. The ear canal is over here, and then the crest is also nicely sculpted. A lot of scale details on here. Love how the black stripes and that red and orange really make the head pop. And my light really won't pick up the teeth in here, so I took a picture of it earlier, but you can definitely see the teeth inside the beak. And then going down to the neck, a lot of nice folds and wrinkles and scale detail. Going down to the hands, the hands are not accurate, but you have to keep in mind this is a 15-year-old mold. If this was more updated, the Parasaurolophus hands will look like it was wearing oven mitts. Going down to the main body, the body really isn't shrink wrap. If you run your finger along the rib cage right here, you can actually feel the ribs, and then flipping the figure over, you can see some nice finely sculpted details along the belly. And yes, the figure does have a cloaca slit. And then going down to the legs, you can see some nice muscle definition. And there's a nice dark wash over this figure that really brings out all that scale detail. Like my biggest complaint about the Stygimoloch that I reviewed earlier, it just felt like it wasn't finished painting. They just did not give it a dark wash to bring out all the details, and yet, this figure released alongside it, and it has a much better paint job than that figure. And then going down to the feet, you can see the toe claws are not painted. It would have been nice if they gave them maybe a little bit of gray paint to highlight the toe claws. And then going down to the tail. Tail is beautifully sculpted, a lot of nice folds, wrinkles, and scales. So all in all, a very well done figure from Papo, even though this is a 15-year-old mold. I still think it looks really good, especially with this new paint scheme. All right, let's move on with some comparisons. Parasaurolophus is a very popular dinosaur, so almost every toy company at least has a Parasaur in their lineup. And first up is the excellent Batat Parasaurolophus. This is the one that got released in Target a few years ago. Now, unfortunately, the way this figure, the materials that they use, it warps very easily, and I cannot get this figure to stand anymore, but it is among one of my favorite Parasaurolophus figures. Let's move this floppy mess over to the side, and here is the big, fat Collecte Parasaurolophus. This thing is an absolute beast. Look how fat this figure is from Collecte, but it's definitely a charming Parasaurolophus figure. And lastly, here it is with the 2017 Safari Limited Parasaurolophus, which I think is a very underrated figure from that stellar 2017 lineup. It's really great once you have it in hand. It has a lot of nice detail on it. And here are a few other Hadrosaur figures from other companies. Here is the 2020 Safari Limited Edmontosaurus, the old Carnegie Corythosaurus, the very old Safari Limited Hypacrosaurus, the Safari Limited Gripposaurus, and lastly, the Bullyland Lambiosaurus. And good news if you're a Hadrosaur fan, PNSO today just announced that they're releasing a 135 scale Lambiosaurus, and it looks absolutely fantastic. And here it is with a couple original Papos. Here's the green standing T-Rex and the original brown Velociraptor. I keep knocking this poor Parasaurolophus over. And lastly, here it is with the rest of the 2020 Papo figures I picked up and reviewed. The infamous Giganotosaurus, the cool-looking Chilesaurus, and the disappointing Stygia Moloch. So, yeah, definitely a decent year from Papo. I'm glad we got more new figures than we did repaints. And I did rank these figures when I did the Stygia Moloch review. But my favorite this year from Papo that I picked up is definitely the Chilesaurus. A very, very unexpected figure from Papo. I never expected a million years for Papo to do such an obscure dinosaur. Surprisingly, the Giganotosaurus is my second favorite figure from this year. Yeah, the sculpt, not a fan of it, but the detail and the paint work is absolutely fantastic. And then come up number 3 is the repaint of this Parasaurolophus. And dead last is this very disappointing Stygia Moloch. I went over all the problems I have with this figure in my review, so if you want to go back and check out all my gripes, feel free. So, final thoughts on this figure. For it being 15 years old, the sculpting and detail is still absolutely fantastic. It goes to show you why Papo has remained popular for so long. They do some excellent work on most of their figures. Not all their figures, on most of their figures. And this new paint scheme on this Parasaurolophus definitely breathed new life into this mold. Obviously, my biggest complaint are the teeth sculpted in the beak of the lower jaw. Still drives me nuts, but thankfully on this version, they're not painted in and as noticeable as they were on the original version. So I definitely do recommend you pick this figure up for your collection. Yeah, there are better, more accurate Parasaur figures from other companies, but I just absolutely love the paint scheme on this one. And like I said at the beginning of the review, I picked this figure up from Everything Dinosaur. Link is in the description if you'd like to order one from them. So that will pretty much do it for the review. I have all the new PNSO that keep getting announced basically every other day. Those should be in a week or two, so expect reviews on those new figures. And as always, if you're enjoying the content on this channel, show your support by hitting that subscription button just below the video. Each subscription helps out the channel tremendously, and it's greatly appreciated. And I'll see you guys for the next one.